when Jim comes in and I look at his data specifically, based off of him and his historical information, and based off of these other trends and intelligent data that I've compiled as a data scientist, I know that he may be about to face a financial hardship. So how can I get in front of him in a very positive, helpful way to say, hey, we're here to help. Here's something that we might be able to do for you. Or maybe I can proactively waive a fee for you before you even have to ask for it, because I can tell that there's some opportunity there. Or I can look at a financial institution and a client and see that consumer is about to stop using that payment device as its primary device.
As I visit different cities and countries, I find that every financial institution is racing to claim the term that they're data-driven. Yet, as I dig deeper, I find that there are very few truly turning data into meaningful action. It gets stuck somewhere along the way. It may be in the collection of data, it may be in the analysis, or it may be, as it often is, in how we deploy this insight. And do we do it wide enough across the organization? From personalizing member and customer experiences to unlocking operational efficiencies, the ability to transform data into insight, and insight, more importantly, into impact, has become a strategic imperative and certainly a differentiator as we get more and more advanced in how digitally mature we are. Yet the journey from collecting data to scaling it across the organization is often filled with cultural, technological, and even compliance challenges. On today's episode of Banking Transform, I'm joined by Jeremiah Lotz, the Senior Vice President of Data and Experience Design at Velera. We're going to explore what it takes to build not just a data strategy, but a data culture, one that fosters literacy, curiosity, and trust outside as well as inside the organization. We'll also discuss how financial institutions can identify when they're ready to scale, the role of AI and governance in driving value, and the new frontiers of data use in an increasingly competitive landscape. So, Jeremiah, this is not the first time in the show. Welcome back. Before we begin, for those who may not know you, can you introduce yourself and also tell us a bit about Velera?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. Jeremiah Lotz. I'm responsible for data and experience design here at Velera. And Velera is a leading financial technology partner of over 4,000 financial institutions. Our primary focus is to help them connect their members or their consumers with secure, innovative payments, data, digital solutions. And my role and the role of my team is to lead an enterprise data office and a focus with design strategy to bring together the power of our data assets, AI, and human-centered design so that we can deliver better outcomes for credit unions and financial institutions.
It's a way for an organization to, for lack of a better term, outsource the knowledge that's needed to drive data, AI, and experience design going forward. It's very interesting because it makes it so that everybody benefits. You work with so many financial institutions that everybody learns from each other as you build. But I think more importantly, you get to see what the challenges are in the marketplace, what's working, what's not working. But more importantly, where's the stumbling blocks? Because this is new ground for most financial institutions. So many financial institutions, as I mentioned, have a data strategy on paper, but few have scaled it or actually have built it based on their individual North Star as opposed to simply doing what everybody else is doing. So what are the clear signs that an organization truly is ready to make a leap into using data for experience design and for operational efficiency?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we do have a unique position because we do get to live in the space of being a cooperative and being able to work with multiple financial institutions and really helping them scale and helping them share lessons learned from our own efforts and from each other in an effective way. And so when we see organizations that are ready to scale, it's really when they have moved past the idea of, I want to collect data so I can see reports or see what has happened. And they want to move into the place of, of I want the data to be a part of how I make decisions and or even how I drive an experience for a consumer. When a financial institution says, I have a use case where I want to improve X by a certain percentage. Great. What does the data mean? What does the data
Yeah.
tell you? And then also, how can you use that data to model out based on historical information and other trends and capabilities, like how you might get to that percentage of growth? What needs to occur? So the reality is when we're ready to scale, it's when we're ready to understand that we have clear business outcomes defined. We have some strong use cases. We know where we have, as a financial institution or even a fintech, we know where we have data available to us and what it means. And we're ready to use that data in a way that we can be proactive and not just kind of retroactive in the information that we're looking at.
It's interesting. It all sounds like mom and apple pie, but as I mentioned in the introduction, there's such a big leap in many cases between having the insight and actually deploying it. We're getting much better, I think, in the industry, deploying it for operational efficiencies, for automation, all the back office design, because we love as an industry to cut costs. But let's go to a different level and say, with your organization, I'm sure there's a few examples that you have where data has really transformed the experience of the member or customer in ways that generally wowed, as opposed to simply building internal efficiencies. Can you share a couple case studies that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to know that consumers know that we have data
Yeah.
and that their financial institutions have data, that their shopping partners have data about them. And, more than 70% of consumers are expecting that we're using that data in some way. And ultimately, they want us to use it to create personalization for them. So if you have this information about me, then I expect that you're going to be able to use it in a positive, productive way that's going to benefit me as the consumer. And so when the wow comes in is how can we take that data and get in front of maybe where the consumer is, or maybe even in front of where the consumer knows that they're at yet. And what I mean by that is, we've got a team of data scientists who will take data from a financial institution and even able to look at it from a consortium level and say, like, we can see these types of trends and behaviors. And when Jim comes in and I look at his data specifically, based off of him and his historical information, and based off of these other trends and intelligent data that I've compiled as a data scientist, I know that he may be about to face a financial hardship. So how can I get in front of him in a very positive, helpful way to say, hey, we're here to help. Here's something that we might be able to do for you. Or maybe I can proactively waive a fee for you before you even have to ask for it, because I can tell that there's some opportunity there. Or I can look at a financial institution and a client and see that consumer is about to stop using that payment device as its primary device. I can see certain trends moving down. I can see certain payment types changing. And so how do I get in front of that conversation with the consumer and help them continue to see the value of their relationship with that financial institution and continue to see where there might be other opportunities? And I think those are the places where, as a consumer, I'm not necessarily creeped out by that, which we have to be careful of.
Yeah.
But I am excited about the benefit that someone anticipated a need before I had to go ask for that need. And it puts me in a more comfortable space. And it also makes me realize my data is being used to benefit me ultimately.
Yeah. And that's where the power really comes in, is that we can build a background on a consumer and also know their activity over day to day, that for us to react positively based on triggers that we see that are very evident, I think we have a way to say, we're not trying to sell you here. We're trying to provide value and actually support that because of the information you have in the background. So, Jeremiah, you work with a lot of organizations, and your case studies on how you can wow the customer are all legendary. We talk about them all the time, about what can be done. So, Jeremiah, you gave a great example of what's happened, but you have a story to tell, maybe an organization your organization worked with that really did what you said and the results they got.
Yeah, absolutely. Our financial partners, the biggest thing that they're looking for is continuing to show value and retain relationships and grow relationships with their consumers. And in the scenario in which I was talking about using data to understand the consumer and starting to anticipate their needs, we have a financial institution who has taken that modeling and that capability really to the next degree, where they've said, yes, I want to go all in and making sure I'm looking at the data and I'm understanding what's happening with my consumers' behaviors. And I want to be able to reach out to that consumer proactively and maybe in steps. If I see that a consumer is likely to attrite and looking maybe to reduce their relationship or their spend with us, how do I reach out to them and ask some questions or give them some advice on information or capabilities that we have? And then as I start to look at their behavior as a result of that, what's the next step I want to take? And it might be different for you than it is for me if we're both consumers of that financial institution.
Yeah.
But they're harnessing that data and they're harnessing that capability of predictive analysis and data science to say, like, I want to create a relationship using my data with that consumer that makes the most sense. And what we've seen as a result of that is we've seen this institution and several others who have dramatically decreased the fact that sometimes your card goes from top of wallet to second or third. And that's important to financial institutions. When you think about the way in which they make interchange income, et cetera, keeping that card top of wallet is critical. So being able to impact that by percentages makes a huge difference for these financial institutions. And those consumers have then walked away from that interaction or that series of interactions, realizing, hey, this financial institution has my interests in mind. And I'm going to make sure when I pull out, a card or make a decision on a transaction that that's who I use. Because now I expect and believe that they've got my back when it comes to fraud. They've got my back when it comes to support and service, because I know that they're looking for my data and at my data.
So, Jeremiah, you help a lot of organizations just for the back office functionality to be able to bring efficiency and everything else to the table. But what is truly different about those organizations that are already looking towards being data literate or future ready data literacy, or what really makes up the difference between those that get stuck in just doing things the way that bankers tend to do, which is cutting costs, versus actually going beyond that?
Yeah. So data literacy has a definition that is deep and wide in many ways, but I would say having a team of leaders who understand the power of information and of data. And, we've talked as an industry for years about digital engagement, digital transformation. We know that's important to relationships with consumers, but understanding and recognizing that data is an asset, not just a tool that can give me, 1 point of information, but it's an asset I can use in that relationship, and understanding how to do that and how to kind of partner that with technology, or even if that skill doesn't exist, recognizing that, hey, there's data here that's going to tell me something, and there's technology out there that tells me something. So who is a partner in the space that can help me bring these two things together? Just that recognition of acknowledging that there's value here and there's an asset is probably the first thing. And then, of course, there's many other things that have to happen within the institution, but that recognition is probably the first break into strong literacy as an organization.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talk about technology a lot, and we've seen on this podcast quite a bit that at the end of the day, it's probably leadership, if not more than technology, at least equal with technology. That it's great if you have all the capabilities, but if you don't deploy them, if you don't use them, if you don't make it part of your whole organization, makes it difficult. And with that in mind, dashboards are everywhere. We talk about dashboards in our sleep sometimes. How do you make data visible in ways that actually influence decision-making across the organization? In other words, when I go back in my banking days, I used to have to wait to the data department getting me anything to work with. And I was I was in the marketing area. But, the best organizations today actually democratize this data across the organization. How do you make data more visible to the front-facing part of the organization, the people in the call center, the people in the branches, the loan calling officers? How do you make that more visible?
Yeah. So this is one of the most exciting things I think happening for financial institutions, and one of the most exciting things I see us doing here at Velera in support of our financial institutions is we know that 3/4 of employees would use data if it's more embedded into their daily workflow.
Yep.
And so how do we make that happen? And one of the things that we say, and one of the phrases that we use as part of our continued, modernization and road down this data journey is we want to make intelligent data available for everyone. And literally that means everyone. And so that starts first, though, with where we were a moment ago in the conversation of making sure people understand data and the power of data. So at an executive level or a leadership level, knowing that there's an asset and it can do something to drive business for me is one thing. But at the level of being a contact center rep or being a support representative or a teller in a financial institution, understanding data at a macro level to know that when I look at information in a certain way, it can tell a story for me. First, we start there. And, in order to get to a place where we've embedded data in workflows and made it accessible for everyone, the first thing that we needed to do, and we encourage our financial institutions to do, is help make sure individuals at every level understand data at its most basic concept, and that data can help you make decisions and it can drive activity for you that can help you support the member. And we even go through exercises internally of, contests on, using data in Excel spreadsheets and what story did you get out of that data. That ultimately then translates to now how do we make data and more data accessible to each individual, regardless of their role, or I would say more specifically based on their role. And so one of the exciting opportunities that exist in the market, just in technology in general, and one of the places that we're headed down is how do we take certain data and embed it into the tools that we provide to our representatives within our organization and to the representatives within the financial institutions who are serving their members? And what that means and looks like is if I'm in a servicing application and I have a consumer call in and say, I need to understand if this last transaction was, what my last transaction was, and I feel like there's a transaction on there I don't understand. Great. Let me help them through that. But how can I put data in front of them if I go back to those predictive models of, I know, by the way, that consumer is starting to, their behavior is starting to change and their opportunities are starting to change. So let's put that data in front of that representative at that moment so they can continue that conversation into something else that makes sense, or meeting that member where they are, if you will. And also when I have a service representative within my organization helping a financial institution, great. I can have a ticket. I can sit there and look at the very specific question, but also how do I put data in front of them to say, hey, here's the trends of the most recent things this financial institution has reached out to us over. Here's the, here's the growth of their portfolio. Here's what their portfolio fraud looks at. And when I look at that one specific question or ticket that comes in, when I have access to that data, I might have a different perspective, or it might lead me down a different road to the research. And so really getting access available to everyone based on their role is what we would refer to as embedded analytics and embedded data. And that's an opportunity to change how they're doing their job and how they're creating experiences for their members.
So when you look at what Velera is doing, but also what financial institutions are asking for, obviously AI comes into the conversation almost immediately. What has evolved over the last couple of years at Velera where you're integrating AI into the process and into what you're giving to your clients? So it's not just AI for AI's sake, but actually delivering value, not only to obviously the financial institution, but to the consumer themselves.
Yeah. So AI is changing so rapidly, and for the good, the benefit to all of us is extreme. What that brings, though, is complexity of how do you govern that? How do you make sure you have model capabilities that are ethical and that we're looking at the right data and that we're looking at the lens of governance when we're thinking about how we want to react and communicate with a individual consumer. So for us, what we've done is, how do we take small use cases that we know are opportunities we want to solve a problem or we want to make an experience better, and how do we start to use AI for that? And that has given us the opportunity to learn and understand how to properly model AI and kind of how to govern those models, so that as we start to expand it into the use cases of taking those analytics, predictive analytics capabilities, or taking models around fraud and actually doing the next thing with them and making them more interactive with the consumer. We understand how we can protect those models and how we can look at it, how we can use the technology, but look at it through a human eye as well, and make sure that we're not crossing any lines or boundaries. But I would say, my most important statement around AI as we start to enable that around, our organization and across the industry is it all goes back to making sure you have an understood use case. And if you have a clear use case of what you want to solve,
Yep.
then you're going to be able to find a way to implement AI that makes sense. If you just want to, implement AI for the sake of AI that you mentioned, your risk is pointing it to the wrong data, creating outputs that are skewed, creating hallucinations that aren't going to be beneficial for you or the consumer. And so it ties back to really define strong use cases. Make sure you understand the data you're connecting it to, and it's solid, protected data. And then AI is going to be a great tool for all of us, but it's not a cover all type of solution.
So we talk about data a lot. We talk about deployment a lot. We talk about value creation and ROI and all that. When you're looking at the financial institution ecosystem today, where is the biggest gap between opportunity and potential and deployment? In other words, there's a performance gap here. We know all these things that can happen, but when you look at the overall organizations, the overall industry, where is the biggest gap between what's possible and what's happening today?
Yeah. So the technology that's available to us is near limitless. And the use cases that we could solve for are infinite. I think what's missing though is very clear business objectives of how do I want to use these tool sets? How do I want to use this technology? And with that, making sure that we have a clear and protected foundation of data to build that off of, right? So the industry has spent years bringing data together. So data is not a new conversation for any of us. In fact, the more investment we make in data, the more we question, haven't we done this? Haven't we invested a lot in data? And we have. The way we've used that data has been to tell us the story of the past, or tell us a story that gives us information about what's happening right now, maybe help us understand what's about to happen. But where we're at right now in this intersection of new technology, new capabilities, is really that data has to be prepared and strong enough and governed well enough that we can use it to predict what's going to happen for us in the front, and get and be in front of consumer, be interacting with the consumer. Because when I want to put an experience with that consumer of leveraging AI or leveraging data science, that data foundation is the most critical. And I can tell you more than half of the organizations that we work with or partner with or engage with in these conversations and these possibilities are still at the early stages of actual governance.
Yeah.
They're at they've been spending a lot of time in data, but they're the early stages of governance. And then how do I now make sure I have this data in a secure, strong place that I can use for these other things? And along with that, the technology that exists in the market today, understanding that and understanding how it's okay to bring multiple pieces together. And I think that's that's a challenge for all of us. We've been very used to and comfortable with solutions that do many things. Now I think we're to a place where we have very strong solutions that do specific things, but we need to bring them together in order to create the whole right experience for your FI, which is going to be different than my FI. And I think that's the other challenge that are facing financial leaders, and one of the obstacles here.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're to the point of understanding how to bring silos together, the internal silos, which we had for years. And now we're looking at bringing together internal and external data within the compliance and regulatory mode. But, what are some of the best practices to doing that process effectively, bringing together internal and external data?
Yes. So I will say that's probably one of the biggest opportunities is augmenting your data with other information. The stronger that information is and the stronger that data is, the better you can do, and the better you can do with the consumer, the better you can do with your own business decisions. There's risk in that, and there's a little bit of fear, and I think what the guide there is, look for ensuring that you have an understanding, that you can map back where did that data come from and what is that data, and also recognize that you don't always need all the raw data of something in order to help you augment or tell you the story. And what I mean by that is you have all of the information about your consumer and your membership base. You don't have to have, if you want to bring in external data, you don't have to have all the secure private data. What you can bring in are trends, or you can bring in highlights of consortium data and certain outputs that say, okay, great, I know my base and that is protected and I can do with it what I want, and I'm going to secure that, and I'm going to bring in other data, but I'm not going to risk the data of my consumers. And so the data I'm going to bring in, maybe it's going to be consortium data that provides insights or provides specific outcomes. With that information, now how can I look at my data? How can I look at these trends? And now how can I tell a story or create a model that is specific to my organization? So, just bringing in external data doesn't necessarily mean that you're risking making your data bad. It's about what data you're bringing in and what level of information it is. So being able to understand and to create a lineage of that data is important when you're making the decision to bring information in. But most importantly, knowing where it came from and what's in it is going to be the best way to safeguard you. Again, I've said this a few times and I'll continue to say it. If you want to bring external data in, you also have to make sure you understand the use cases that you want to solve for, because you don't want to bring garbage in, right?
Jeremiah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going, at the end of the day, we get all wrapped up into how much data we can put together when we really haven't thought about what are we going to use it for. And if you don't know your North Star, if you don't know your key use case, don't bring in data for the sake of bringing in data if it's not going to provide you strategic value and you're going to use it immediately. What's going on in this whole digital world is that data is updated every moment of every day. And as a result, if you simply get it and then sit on it for 6 months and say, well, let's use that now, it may not be as effective as it would have been when you first got it. So, when you're looking at a data-driven transformation within financial institutions, at the end of the day, we got to justify the amount of money we're investing in this. What key metrics should leaders look to ensure that they're actually delivering both short-term and long-term strategic value?
Yeah. So I think, the ROI on the investment that you're making is important. And you've got to be able to look at, lagging indicators like, what is my member growth? What is NPS? What is retention or cost to serve? But the things that you can look at that are leading indicators is, am I increasing digital adoption? Many of the ways in which we can use data is to drive experiences, personalized experiences and unique experiences. That's going to drive digital adoption. What we know about digital adoption over the last many years is those consumers typically are worth more over time, and those consumers also are less costly to serve. And so if I look at that in real time or near real time, like how is this interaction and or this investment I'm making creating something that is driving digital adoption? How is the data being used? So when we talked about, bringing data in externally or having large amounts of data and creating these models, one of the metrics that you want to look at is if I have X amount of data in my ownership, how much of that is being used on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and is it worth the storage that I'm paying? And ideally, in the more modern world, you've got the ability to kind of ramp that up, ramp that down, depending on what you ultimately need. But doing any of this work is going to require us to bring data in. There's a cost to that. So you want to watch, am I actually using that the way I believe that I would? And the other indicator is, as a business leader, do I have access to insights quicker than I was able to get them before? So am I able to look at something on a daily basis or a weekly basis that before I might have only seen quarterly or monthly? And if I am, does that give me a story and allow me to make decisions quicker and in more near real time that I can, either go deeper in a specific area that's benefit me, or make a turn if I need to in a quicker manner than I've been able to in the past. And that's a significant indicator.
It's interesting, Jeremiah. We talk about these concepts, these things that are very doable today, but a lot of financial institutions, there's a lot of strategies being implemented right now. There's a lot of priorities. So if you're reaching out to the middle market, to the lower and from an asset size, 10 billion, roughly either side of 10 billion, what would you recommend that leaders in that organization do today to get that lowest hanging fruit and getting maybe off stuck?
Yeah. Inventory, what assets you have available to you, and then inventory what the outcomes are that you want for your consumer base. And when you look at those two things together, do they serve each other? Do the assets I have available to me in technology and data, do they match the outcomes that I want my consumer to have? And if they don't, where are those gaps? Where have I invested maybe too much in one space that maybe I need to ramp down and invest up in another area? I would say that's one of the most critical areas. The other thing is to really understand and make sure you have clarity on what your consumer base wants from you, based on the market that you're serving. And again, kind of goes back to those use cases. But what we do know is only about a third of consumers believe that their financial institutions are providing them the type of personalization and experience that they're looking for. So what does that mean to you? It's going to mean something different to every financial institution. So define what that means to you. If your consumers in general feel, less than half or a third of them feel that you're actually hitting the mark on the experience that they're looking for, what does that mean for your base, and what do you want it to be? And then you map that up against, okay, well, what assets do I have in technology and data and servicing, et cetera? And how am I going to bridge that gap? Then I think you can make, much smarter decisions on where your investment is going forward. While that's not the traditional type of, data from a database type of scenario, really that suggestion is, use data and become a data-driven organization. So use that data to drive what are those decisions that I'm going to go make. And, a lot of times they'll point back to, hey, I've got an opportunity to use my actual data differently. But using those insights to make strong decisions on use case and the businesses I want to get into, or the experiences I want to provide, I think are the key at this point. There's so many technologies. Everyone's knocking on the door to show something shiny, and they're great things. But if you don't know exactly what business case or use case that you're going after, then it's easy to get distracted by them.
Boy, so well said. And it's interesting because there's so much to talk about when you're talking about data, AI, the deployment, the regulatory concepts, and being ready for tomorrow, because we are going through so much change right now, and keeping up is a chore in and of itself. To hear more about data and AI transformation, be sure to watch the other episodes we've done from executives of Velera, including Jeremiah himself, to get more insight into how to deploy better data solutions.